Kevin continued to punish Sebastian Young for looking down on him and threatening to make Lily pay for his actions. Fortunately, Dalton stopped him from getting too carried away. Despite this, Sebastian told them that it was too late to redeem himself in the eyes of the Foundation. But before Kevin could finish responding, he suddenly sensed that someone was hiding and called them out. Just then, Dalton felt the tip of a sword touching the back of his neck as 5 or 6 figures quickly came out, one of whom mocked them for trying to kill each other despite being on the same side. As the man slowly ran the tip of his sword along the back of Dalton Steele's spine, this caused a bone-piercing chill to arise in his heart. As such, he didn't dare to make any reckless moves and remained standing where he was. "Are you also from the Vanguard forces of the Pinnacle?" Kevin's pupils widened. "I guess this ant isn't so stupid after all. Since you already know who we are, it would be best if you all resumed killing each other right now, so that I don't have to waste my time and energy." The man raised his chin and looked at Kevin with eyes full of contempt. "Are all the people of the Vanguard so stupid? Almost everyone has the same arrogant but clueless expressions on their faces." Kevin started to scold them. "How dare you speak so disrespectfully to us? A mere ant like you deserves to be stepped on." The man's facial expression turned ugly. "Enough, Marco. Why are you still talking to these lowly ants? Let's get rid of them quickly, so we can move on to finding the other warriors of the Foundation. That way we can get off this island as soon as possible." Suddenly, a purple-haired man took 2 steps forward. Kevin felt a powerful aura coming from his body. He could tell that this person was intent on killing them all himself. "Why don't you introduce yourself first? That way I can properly address you." Kevin's eyes narrowed as he stared them down. "Since you've asked so nicely, then I shall accommodate your final request before your death and introduce myself to you. So listen carefully. My name is Oscar Brady." He put one hand behind his back and looked at Kevin with disdain as if to assert his superiority over him. "Didn't you say that we should stop talking to them? Let me finish him off." As Marco Rudd spoke, he continued to move his sword lightly across the back of Dalton's neck. The tip of his sword suddenly caught a small wound in Dalton's skin, causing blood to slowly seep out from his neck. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind made the leaves in their surroundings rustle intensely. Oscar Brady and the others couldn't help but blink a few times as they wondered what it was. At the same time, Kevin had moved in front of Dalton as fast as lightning, and a second later a piercing sound was heard as the sword in Marco's hand was instantly broken in 2. "Be careful!" Oscar Brady quickly grabbed Marco's shoulder and took more than 10 steps back. "I admit that I underestimated your strength just now." Oscar looked at Kevin seriously. "I guess it's only right for me to ask what your name is as well." "My name is Kevin. Maybe we'll meet again in the final battle." Kevin put his hand on Dalton's neck. Upon hearing this, the people of the Vanguard unit were stunned, and the way they looked at Kevin changed dramatically. "Kevin, by any chance is your surname Williams?" Oscar's eyes were filled with shock. "If it isn't Williams, what else could it be? Brady?" Kevin didn't mind firing a verbal attack. "I'm sorry. I was just kidding. Even if I had the chance to have your surname, I wouldn't want to be related to someone like you." Dalton couldn't help but laugh out loud because of this. He didn't expect Kevin to have such a glib side to him. "How dare you? I really can't take this annoying guy anymore. Let me take care of him." Marco threw away the broken sword in his hand and drew another one from behind his back. Oscar turned his head and glanced angrily at Kevin, then he looked at his team and instructed everyone. "Finish them quickly!" As soon as he gave his command, all the people from the Vanguard unit started moving and immediately surrounded Kevin and Dalton. Judging from the current situation, there was no way they could escape. Kevin had to give up on the idea and prepare himself for a fight. Kevin then charged forward and threw a vicious punch at the man who was coming at him. The powerful force caused ripples of energy to appear in the air behind him as a pool of blood burst out from the man's mouth before he collapsed on the ground. Dalton then let out a loud roar and threw both of his fusion hammers out in front of him. As they smashed into two men's chests, the hammers instantly broke through their sternums and crushed their hearts. None of the Vanguard unit's people were expecting that three of them would be killed by Kevin and Dalton right away. In fact, they had imagined the complete opposite scenario to happen when they first encountered them fighting one another. "Dalton, don't hold back. They're all enemies." Kevin turned around and just barely avoided the sword strike of another Vanguard member, which had almost slid down the tip of his nose. Before the man could recover and strike again, Kevin quickly grabbed his wrist and twisted it hard. A loud cracking sound could be heard as he let out a painful cry. Not wanting to waste any time, Kevin then swiftly struck the man's temple with his fist to end his life. Just as he was about to continue fighting the other members of the Vanguard unit, Oscar Brady suddenly appeared in front of Kevin. "Kevin, you've successfully caught my attention. Now I shall deal with you myself." Just as Oscar finished speaking, he stretched out his palm at lightning speed and was about to grab Kevin's throat and crush it. "That'll depend on whether you have the ability or not." Kevin raised his left hand to protect his upper body. Both of their attacks were fierce and deadly. However, Kevin managed to block Oscar's arm. He then poked both of Oscar's eyes with his other hand. "Go to hell!" Oscar shouted angrily and quickly retaliated by hitting Kevin with a shoulder tackle. Caught off guard by this, Kevin was forced to face his attack head-on and did the same thing as Oscar. A second later, a loud bang was suddenly heard. Waves of energy rippled through the air around the two under the intense collision of their spiritual energy. Both Oscar and Kevin let out muffled groans as their legs sank into the ground. However, neither of them was close to giving up. After twisting their upper bodies slightly and maneuvering their way to their feet, they once again charged towards each other with shoulder tackles. This time, the intensity of the collision managed to increase by a whole level. Both of their bodies slid back more than 30 feet, creating deep skid marks on the ground. "Kevin!" Dalton called out as he struck a member of the Vanguard unit on the head with one of his fusion hammers, knocking him to the ground. "I'm fine," Kevin reassured him as he struggled to pull himself up from the ground. "You've withstood all my attacks thus far. This proves that you're qualified to be my opponent." Oscar slowly pulled out a spear from behind his back and drew his spiritual energy toward it. This gave his weapon a dazzling purple glow. Upon seeing this, the remaining members of the Vanguard unit chose to retreat back a few steps to give them some space to fight. Dalton rushed in front of Kevin in a flash, keeping his guard up against Oscar. "Behold, my purple lightning spear. You should be honored that you're lucky enough to be able to die under this spear." Oscar's expression became more and more sinister as he spoke. "When this spear pierces through your body, you'll feel as if you were struck by lightning." "Be careful, Dalton." Kevin took out the night dagger to protect himself as he quickly scanned their surroundings. He could clearly feel that the air around him had become much more humid, and the temperature was also rapidly rising. "Prepare to die." Oscar gripped the spear in his hand tightly and charged toward them with murderous intent. "Remember, you're just an ant who will inevitably die in my hands. It's too bad that you'll never get to see what it's like on Apex Island. If you had, you surely would have chosen to join the Pinnacle instead of the Foundation." Oscar Brady's arrogant voice was accompanied by an intimidating aura. With the night dagger in his hand, Kevin surrounded himself and Dalton with spiritual energy as a protective shield for what was about to come. When Oscar Brady waved the purple lightning spear around, it generated glaring sparks, which made Marco Rudd and the other members of their Vanguard unit retreat back even further in fear of getting hit. After all, who would want to get struck by something as powerful as lightning? Oscar then forcefully threw his spear at Kevin and Dalton. Upon impact, a thunderous sound was heard as the ground shook intensely. And with clouds of dust covering the sky and blocking everyone's vision, no one could clearly see what was happening inside. After Kevin and Dalton managed to kill a couple of the Vanguard unit's members with ease, their leader Oscar Brady finally stepped in to fight Kevin himself. When Kevin managed to go toe-to-toe with his initial attacks, Oscar then brought out his purple lightning spear to use against them. Kevin responded by pulling out his knight dagger while Dalton rushed over in front of him with his fusion hammers just before Oscar rushed toward them, with murderous intent. Given this, Oscar, who had unleashed this attack, had to step back several feet as well out of precaution. Meanwhile, Sebastian Young and the others who had fainted were helplessly sent flying backward like ragdolls due to the huge impact. Back at the Foundation's base camp, everyone who had witnessed all of this on the monitor, especially Wayne, Ford, and Harley Shepard, furrowed their brows tightly.
How are Sebastian and the others doing? After suffering serious injuries because of that arrogant brat, can they withstand such a huge impact?
One of the leaders asked with some concern.
What's so special about this kid anyway? Not only did the two deans of the Healing Art School constantly favor him against their better judgment, but now even the Vanguard is fighting him relentlessly on behalf of the Pinnacle?
Another one angrily voiced what everyone else was thinking at that moment. With the surveillance footage that everyone was watching having no audio, no one really understood the true issue between Kevin and Sebastian. However, they were all discerning enough to figure out that the people of the Pinnacle had been targeting Kevin from the very beginning.
Can Kevin and Dalton survive?
Harley Shepard anxiously wondered. Wayne Ford didn't answer his question. How could Harley Shepard not see that the leader of the Vanguard unit was using a top-grade weapon? Only a weapon of that caliber could match an expert's own spiritual energy to launch this kind of powerful attack. Currently, the strength of the elite experts in the Foundation was much weaker compared to their glory days. Moreover, with only a handful of top-grade weapons known to exist, it was rare for anyone to see such a superior display of strength. Therefore, Wayne remained silent because he didn't know the answer in his heart. If the attack of a top-grade weapon was so easy to deal with, how could it be considered to be top-grade in the first place? Almost 5 minutes had passed before the clouds of dust that covered the sky gradually dispersed. By then, a 30-foot deep pit appeared before them. And when they saw its bottom clearly, everyone was shocked to find that Kevin and Dalton still had their backs facing each other. It seemed that their bodies were protected from any harm with Kevin's spiritual energy surrounding them. At the same time, Dalton's two hammers were on the ground, and both of them had formed a triangular shape along with Kevin's knight dagger. Well, it was a good attempt, but unfortunately, it didn't hurt either of us. Kevin showed a cheap smile as he looked at Oscar Brady and the others, who were all hiding several feet away.
You? How did you survive? And why are your weapons on the ground?
Marco Rudd stammered. As a member of Oscar Brady's unit, he clearly knew how powerful this attack was. Among the younger generation of the Vanguard, he could count the number of warriors who could withstand its impact with just one hand. Metal conducts electricity. Isn't that common sense? Kevin looked at them with disdain. How could they not have thought of this? Even children knew that. Perhaps after living on Apex Island for so many years, the Vanguard forces of the Pinnacle had been too focused on their martial arts training and on increasing their strength that they never bothered to learn some basic science. Aside from surrounding themselves with spiritual energy to block Oscar's purple lightning spear, Kevin and Dalton had used their metal weapons as lightning rods that conducted the electricity it generated straight into the ground to avoid getting electrocuted.
Impossible!
Oscar's face instantly turned pale as he tightly clenched his fists in frustration. I admire your effort. Keep working hard, and I'm sure that your future achievements will be limitless if you survive this battle, Kevin said as he bent down to grab the night dagger and return the fusion hammers to Dalton. Let's go our separate ways for now. I see that you've consumed a lot of spiritual energy with that attack, and I don't want to take advantage of my enemies when they're not at full strength, so don't force me to go against my word. If fate allows it, we shall meet again in the end. When he finished speaking, Kevin simply smiled at them. As he held the night dagger in one hand, he waved to Oscar and his unit with the other. Then he disappeared into the woods with Dalton in a flash. After seeing that the two of them had withstood his purple lightning spear attack, Oscar Brady was naturally left speechless by this. The fact that he had been outsmarted by basic science and some quick thinking only seemed to prove that he wasn't as good as them. Moreover, putting aside the fact that he had wasted Oscar's spiritual energy, Kevin never explicitly rubbed his defeat in his face. In fact, Kevin actually showed some mercy. And Oscar, that was even worse, as every word he said felt like a stab to his heart. After all, he was the chosen leader of the Vanguard's younger generation, and he had just been humiliated in front of not just his teammates, but also everyone who was watching their footage from both camps. The more he thought about this, the more infuriated he became. Suddenly, Oscar's face turned red. He then began to hyperventilate before collapsing to the ground. "Oscar!" Marco Rudd shouted with a frightened look on his face. Meanwhile, Kevin and Dalton had only stopped to catch their breath after running at full speed for about 10 minutes. Kevin stuck the night dagger in the ground with all his strength. After looking around vigilantly, he couldn't hold on any longer and collapsed to the ground.
"Kevin, how are you?"
Dalton's face didn't look too good either. "Still alive." Kevin sat down on the ground, breathing heavily. His exhaustion proved that Oscar Brady's attack wasn't as easy to take as he had made it seem a few minutes ago. Although Kevin managed to dodge his attack, he had used up a lot of spiritual energy to protect them from the impact of the purple lightning spear's force. This made his body numb all over, and he felt queasy. If it wasn't for the fact that one of them had consumed several medicinal pills to build a strong power base, and the other had Travis Adams' spiritual energy flowing through his veins, Kevin wasn't sure if they would have been able to survive Oscar's attack. Given this, Kevin knew very well that if he were to reveal his true condition in front of Oscar Brady, he and Dalton would have definitely been killed by the Vanguard's unit. Moreover, since they had to make a quick exit before Oscar could catch on, how could he have the time to check on Sebastian Young and the others? There should still be about 20 minutes left before we have to leave this area and keep moving. For now, let's take some time to recuperate. Our next encounter will be even more dangerous. After saying this, Kevin sat cross-legged on the ground, closed his eyes, then started to control his breathing. Upon seeing this, Dalton didn't ask any more questions. He clearly knew that if he wanted to live, he had to listen to Kevin's instructions. Back in Chicago, Spencer was sitting on the sofa while Adriana sat across from him. Because neither of them took the initiative to speak, the atmosphere in the office seemed to be especially heavy. Since Kevin didn't know when he would be able to return from battle, he had asked Spencer to come to Chicago to help him take care of the matters that he had left behind. As for the Radiance's headquarters, he had temporarily left it to Derek and Alfred Dixon to manage. Today was the deadline that Kevin had previously given to Dominic Archer after he asked him for some time to investigate the attack on Emo Squire. At the hospital, Emo's life was saved after 5 hours of surgery. However, while the shot to his abdomen wasn't fatal, he had lost too much blood and was in a coma. Given this, his doctors couldn't rule out the possibility that he might not ever wake up at all. And even if he did, he might remain in a vegetative state for the rest of his life. After arriving in Chicago, Spencer and his men had spent the past 2 days working with Xavier Marshall's team as they split the remaining names from Adriana's list. However, none of the people they interrogated proved to have any connection with Emo Squire's attack. Suddenly, Hurried footsteps came from outside the door. Spencer loudly spat out 2 words.
"Come in."
As soon as he finished speaking, the office door was pushed open and Dominic Archer walked in with an ugly expression on his face. He then looked around vigilantly, and after making sure that he didn't see Kevin, his heart relaxed a little. "What did you find out from your investigation, Mr. Archer? How are you going to prove that you're innocent?" Adriana stared at him coldly and asked. There was a time when the two of them were once of similar status as prominent figures in Chicago, but now their lives presented a stark contrast. While Adriana Wright had preserved her influential standing in the corporate world, Dominic Archer's reputation had taken a dramatic nosedive in the underworld. Plus, with Spencer by her side, Adriana naturally wouldn't be afraid of someone like Dominic Archer. Back in Chicago, Spencer was sitting with Adriana Wright in her office. After being sent by Kevin to help find the culprit behind Emo Squire's attack, he had spent the past 2 days working together with Xavier Marshall to interrogate everyone on Adriana's list of possible suspects. However, none of them proved to have any connection with the incident. Suddenly, Dominic Archer arrived, looking around vigilantly to see if Kevin was there before relaxing a little. With today being the deadline that he had been given to report his findings and prove his innocence, Adriana then asked Dominic about his investigation. "Mr. Archer, don't be shy. Since you came in here just in time, you must have found the key to prove your innocence, right?" Adriana feigned a polite smile as she subtly sneered at him. Upon hearing this, Dominic Archer didn't answer her immediately. He first looked at Spencer, who was sitting beside her. Recognizing that he was an elite expert based on his powerful aura, Dominic told himself that he must not act rashly today.
"I didn't find the culprit,"
Dominic admitted somewhat awkwardly. "Does that mean you can't prove your innocence?" Adriana asked in surprise. Although the power of the Archer family had sharply decreased in recent weeks, Dominic Archer was still the leader of his family. And with this being a matter that concerned his own life, it was impossible for him not to mobilize all his men and use whatever resources he had in order to save himself. "Did you consider what would happen to you if you came up short in your investigation? Or did you not take Kevin's words seriously at all?" Adriana's voice suddenly became cold. However, Dominic Archer pretended not to be afraid of her. He then sat on the sofa and tidied his clothes.
"President Wright, I hope you can understand one thing. I know you have a good relationship with Emo Squire, but this matter is between Kevin and me."
Dominic responded with a straight face.
"Besides, I always do things openly. Thus, if I really did something, I would definitely admit it. Moreover, it's not my style to leave anyone alive. I wouldn't want to trouble myself with any loose ends later on."
Dominic tried his best to express that the only person he feared was Kevin, and regardless of how other people viewed either of them at the moment, he didn't want Adriana to think that her status held any weight with him. "You have no proof. You have to back up your words first with some concrete evidence. Otherwise, there will be consequences, and it won't just affect you. I believe that Spencer here won't let the Archer family off easily." Adriana firmly asserted herself in front of him, instantly revealing the imposing businesswoman who had imposed her will in the corporate world for many years. Just like that, what was left of Dominic Archer's confidence had disappeared.
"Look, I understand that everything has to be based on evidence. However, this matter isn't as simple as it appears on the surface,"
Dominic shakily uttered.
"Do you think that such empty words are worthy of our trust?"
Spencer finally spoke up.
"Whether you believe it or not, the attack on Emo Squire has absolutely nothing to do with me. I know it's hard to believe, but I'm really innocent this time."
Dominic couldn't help but panic in his heart. Generally speaking, almost everyone knew that Emo Squire was backed by Kevin. Because of this, there were only a few people in Chicago who dared to touch him. However, with Dominic Archer being one of them, he currently stood out like a sore thumb as the most suspicious name out of everyone on Adriana's list. especially because the two had a recent dispute.
"You can leave now and go back to your home."
Spencer gave him an intense stare down before waving his hand and adding,
"Enjoy whatever time you have left on this earth. After all, you never know if you'll suddenly disappear one day."
"Are you threatening me?" Dominic angrily stood up from the sofa and clenched his fist tightly. He then stood in front of Spencer with a fierce expression on his face. Dominic Archer had been the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld for so many years, and this was the first time he had encountered someone who wasn't threatened at all by him.
"You can think whatever you want while letting yourself out. I won't see you off."
Spencer pointed at the door and remarked indifferently. He didn't have the slightest intention of wasting his time and energy on Dominic Archer any longer. Right now, he had only one goal in coming to Chicago, and that was to help Kevin find Emo's assailant who was still lurking in the shadows. In any case, Kevin had already given him a chance. If Dominic Archer still didn't take advantage of the opportunity to prove himself, he wouldn't mind using some forceful methods if Kevin asked him to deal with him later on. Dominic initially wanted to say something else, but in the end he slowly relaxed his fist and left with his tail between his legs. Although he had been feared like a powerful king in the eyes of Chicago's ordinary citizens, he had long ago lost the ability to fight on Kevin's level. The moment Dominic Archer left, the office fell silent once again. This was like a test, and the only ones who should be nervous were those who were taking it. But very quickly, the time that Kevin set had passed, and other than Dominic Archer, no one else had come personally to Adriana Wright to prove their innocence. All of the people who were interrogated expressed their innocence, but they couldn't find any evidence to back up their statements.
"It seems that one of these didn't take Mr. Williams' words to heart and dared to play a trick on us,"
Spencer said calmly, without a trace of panic in his voice. Instead, he even had a cruel smile on his face. "What are you planning to do?" Adriana suddenly had a bad premonition when she saw his expression.
"Since there are people who don't take this incident seriously, I feel that it's necessary for us to give them a reminder of who has the final say over their lives in Chicago,"
Spencer revealed casually as if he was talking about a simple matter. He then took out his phone and dialed Xavier Marshall's number.
"You guys can start now. Remember to do a clean and thorough job. Don't leave any hidden dangers for Mr. Williams and make sure not to cause him any trouble as well,"
Spencer instructed carefully.
"Don't worry. Leave it to me."
Xavier Marshall hung up the phone. Upon hearing this, Adriana thought of all kinds of possibilities in her mind, but she still couldn't figure out what exactly Spencer wanted to do. Time passed by slowly as Spencer spent the next half hour drinking some coffee, while Adriana was busy processing company documents. Just then, a man hurriedly stumbled his way into the office and rushed over to Adriana in a panic.
"It's not good, President Wright."
"Calm down first, and speak slowly. Why are you so flustered? What happened?" Adriana frowned slightly and said,
"The young heir of the Brooks family was assassinated at home and was stabbed more than a dozen times. After that, the murderer himself took the initiative to call the police without any resistance," the man reported. "Moreover, the Ruiz, Ward, and Bailey families were attacked as well, and there were several casualties among them. Similarly, the thing that puzzled the cops was that the murderers never escaped from the scene and surrendered themselves willingly after reporting what they had done." The man continued, "Dominic Archer was also attacked in his mansion and was stabbed twice. Fortunately, his subordinates reacted in time to save his life. Again, the assailant was the one who called the police and admitted his crime." After informing them about this series of events, the man's heart was palpitating out of anxiety. This left Adriana Wright stunned for a long moment. When she finally regained her senses, she quickly waved her hand at the man as a gesture for him to leave. All of the families that were involved in these incidents were considered to be influential figures in Chicago. As such, Adriana was also surprised at how all of these tragedies had happened in such quick succession. However, what bothered her even more was the fact that all of these families happened to be on the list of suspects that she had previously compiled for Kevin.
Thinking back to what Spencer had said earlier, Adriana instantly understood what was going on. Are you planning to exchange all these people's lives for emos? Adriana's heart pounded violently as she asked. While she had seen a fair number of hostile and aggressive intimidation tactics in her many years in business, this was the first time she had heard of such a ruthless and brutal orchestrated attack occurring almost simultaneously.
President Wright, don't speak of such nonsense. I've been here with you the entire time, haven't I? How could I have ordered all these attacks then?
Spencer replied with a smile.
Those people probably just offended some of their many enemies and they were taken out as revenge. Besides, all of their assailants have already been caught, haven't they? That's all that matters.
Adriana slowly closed her eyes and took a deep breath. How could she not understand what Spencer had meant with these words? He wanted to create panic so that whoever was viewed as a suspect in Emo Squire's attack would understand who they were dealing with. As such, anyone who couldn't make an effort to prove their innocence and point them toward the real culprit would be killed rather than let go. At the same time, all their murderers had voluntarily surrendered, so anyone else wouldn't suspect a thing. Suddenly, Spencer's phone rang, and the caller ID showed that it was Xavier Marshall.
Should we still proceed with the rest of them?
There was no emotion in Xavier Marshall's voice, as if what they had done was just a routine task.
Of course. We have to continue until someone either confesses to the crime or points us to the true culprit, Spencer replied faintly. Got it.
Xavier hesitated for a moment and added,
By the way, you can rest assured that the people I sent out are all very reliable and loyal. They're used to going after our enemies, so they definitely won't cause trouble for Mr. Williams in the future. As long as you know what you're doing.
After saying this, Spencer hung up the phone. Another half an hour passed as more incidents of men barging into houses to murder influential people were being reported. As news of these tragic events spread across Chicago, its citizens were suddenly enveloped by a wave of fear that made their hearts tremble. However, only a few people knew that all these incidents weren't just a coincidence, and they were actually connected to Kevin in secret. Because of this, those who were aware of this fact and had previously offended Kevin in some form felt that their lives were now in danger. Fearing that they could be next, these people couldn't sit still any longer and immediately tried to call to him, but no one answered. As Adriana sat in her office and received the reports one after another, she only grew more and more terrified about the final outcome of this purge. Are you really going to kill everyone on the list? Adriana finally couldn't bear not to ask. There are so many innocent people being...
President Wright, don't be too compassionate. Think about Mr. Squire's current condition. If you were the one lying in a coma in the hospital instead, wouldn't he stop at nothing to find out who did it?
Spencer remained unbothered by this.
If Mr. Williams was here, he definitely wouldn't oppose to my methods as long as they were justified.
Spencer continued.
Moreover, I've done my research. None of these rich and heartless people are truly innocent. Even if they weren't the ones who attacked Mr. Squire, they've stepped on others unfairly just to get to the top. Thus, it's not a big deal if a few of them die. In fact, Chicago might even be better off without them.
Suddenly, Adriana's phone vibrated, showing an unknown caller. Looking hesitantly at Spencer, she didn't immediately respond. Things had already gotten way out of hand and beyond her control. And with Spencer taking over this matter, Adriana felt like she no longer had the authority to make any decisions. After all, she was just an ordinary person. With all the names on Adriana Wright's list denying their involvement in Emo Squire's attack but unable to prove their innocence, Spencer instructed Xavier Marshall to kill everyone unless they either confessed to the crime or pointed them to the real culprit. As news of this terrifying purge spread across Chicago and struck fear in everyone, Adriana sat uncomfortably in her office, feeling that the situation had already gotten way out of hand and beyond her control under Spencer's lead. Suddenly, an unknown caller contacted her. Adriana then looked at Spencer as she was hesitant to respond without his approval.
Take it. It looks like some people can't take it anymore and want to beg for mercy. They must be scared out of their wits."
Spencer casually gestured for her to answer the phone with a confident smile on his face. With that, Adriana Wright composed herself first before picking up the phone. "Hello? May I ask—"
"It's Dominic Archer."
The person on the other end of the phone interrupted and immediately revealed his identity. "Mr. Archer, why are you calling me using a different number?" Adriana asked suspiciously. It wasn't like she didn't have Dominic Archer's number in her phone.
"President Wright, you and I both know what's happening all over Chicago as we speak. That being said, I hope you can inform Kevin that there's no need to go through so much trouble by sending people to attack everyone else. I already confessed that I was the one who tried to have Emo Squire killed."
Dominic Archer's tone was unusually calm. "What? Did you really send one of your men to do it?" Adriana cried out loudly as she stood up from her chair in shock. Seeing her reaction, Spencer's demeanor became serious as his eyebrows furrowed. "If that's the case, then why didn't you admit it before? You even vehemently denied your involvement, insisted that you didn't do it countless times before leaving my office." Adriana was still perplexed by his sudden confession.
"I was thinking of shirking responsibility and trying to trick you, but I didn't expect Kevin to retaliate so ruthlessly. He didn't hesitate to cause so much bloodshed and sacrifice his own men just to find the real culprit."
Dominic plainly responded. He added,
"Currently, Chicago is already in a state of panic. Too many innocent people have lost their lives due to this incident. As much as I hope to get away with this, I don't want anyone else to die because of me. Tell Kevin to stop this unnecessary purge. He can just come and find me to get his revenge."
The moment she answered the phone earlier, Adriana Wright had turned on the speakerphone, and when Dominic Archer's confession reached Spencer's ears, he couldn't help but frown. Despite his outright confession, the timing of it all was just too strange. Furthermore, although he couldn't find any loopholes in his explanation, Spencer felt that something wasn't right.
"President Wright, now that I've already told you everything, I have to go. If there's anything else, just come to me,"
Dominic said as he was about to hang up the phone. "Wait a minute." Adriana finally recovered from her shock. "Before you hang up, I have one more question that I need you to answer. You said before that if you were the one who did it, then you would have ended Emo's life to avoid any loose ends. So why did you choose to spare him then?"
"While it normally isn't my style, there's a very simple reason why I didn't kill him. It's because I knew that Kevin's strength was too powerful and I didn't want our relationship to become too tense for him to force me out. After all, Chicago is my home and I want to keep making a living in this city."
Dominic Archer's attitude remained very calm. Without showing any emotion in his words, it was as if he had already accepted his fate. "Did you really do it, Mr. Archer?" Adriana wasn't a fool to believe him so quickly. On one hand, it was true that Dominic Archer's connections and the scope of his influence were all in Chicago. And if he had killed Emo Squire, he would certainly have become mortal enemies with Kevin, leaving him without any chance of surviving. However, she also knew that Dominic Archer was usually bold and straightforward with his moves. Thus, despite his recent dispute with Emo Squire, this was why Adriana Wright didn't suspect him to be the real culprit from the beginning.
"I already told you that I did it, and I've already answered your question. If Kevin really wants to take my life as revenge, then so be it. With Emo Squire still lying unconscious in the hospital, I wouldn't blame him."
Dominic's tone suddenly became cold.
"However, if he really wants to destroy me, it won't be an easy task. Although I know that I'm not his equal, it won't be too difficult for me to hit him where it really hurts."
As soon as he finished speaking, Dominic Archer immediately ended their conversation and hung up the phone. With that, Adriana took a deep breath. She then sat down on the sofa and took a sip of coffee as she sorted through her thoughts. "What do you think about Dominic Archer's confession?" Adriana looked at the cup in her hand and asked Spencer without looking up.
"I don't think that he did it."
Spencer took a deep look at Adriana and kept thinking about what Dominic had said before. "What makes you say that?" Adriana's mind was so muddled right now that she couldn't help but rub her forehead.
Call it intuition. I sensed that something was off with his confession based on what I know about him.
Spencer narrowed his eyes and added,
Before arriving in Chicago, I received news that Mr. Williams had personally attacked the Archer family for the sake of his friendship with the Steele family.
You mean that the relationship between the two of them had already become tense before this incident? In that case, if it was really Dominic who attacked Emo, there would be no way for him to spare his life. Adriana had confirmed her suspicions.
That's right. With Dominic Archer's reputation tarnished because of Kevin, would he really show any mercy toward Emo if he were the culprit?
Spencer slowly picked up his phone and dialed Xavier Marshall's number. He told him that there was a change of plans and to pull back all of his men for the time being. As soon as he got off the phone, Xavier Marshall immediately passed along Spencer's order to his men. Although the situation in Chicago had settled down for the time being, some people noticed that Dominic Archer seemed to be rapidly consolidating his forces, arranging for all the men that he could use to be near the Archer family's mansion. As such, those discerning eyes could tell that this was just the calm before the storm. And because of this, Kevin's name and fierce reputation once again resounded throughout the entire city. No one would have thought that this useless son-in-law from the Jones family, whom everyone despised, could ever reach such an unattainable position in just a few months' time. For him to have forced Dominic Archer, who had been the king of Chicago's underworld for so many years, to the point where he had no choice but to raise his guard, reminded them that Kevin had truly become a force to be reckoned with. However, Kevin didn't know anything about the recent developments in Chicago. Back on the island, he and Dalton Steele had just escaped after fighting another group of warriors from the Vanguard unit of the Pinnacle. "Dalton, are you all right?" Kevin's breathing seemed to be a little hurried. The experts from the Vanguard that they had just encountered were all level 5 warriors. Moreover, the 5 of them fought perfectly in sync with each other, which made them even more difficult to deal with. Although Kevin wasn't afraid and did his best to stand toe-to-toe against them, Dalton was slashed 4 times by their opponents and was struggling to keep up at the moment. One of his wounds in particular extended from his left shoulder all the way to his right hip. The cut was so deep that some of his bones were visible. If it wasn't for Dalton's power base and Kevin carrying him on his back to escape, he probably wouldn't have survived his injuries.
"I've seen better days,"
Dalton said as he took a deep breath. He then gritted his teeth as he tore off a small piece of cloth from his jacket and wrapped it around a wound on his hand. "Take this pill," Kevin said as he took a pill out from his pocket and handed it over. Dalton knew that it was impossible for Kevin to have any junk on him, so he immediately swallowed it without hesitation. If there was an expert from the Herbalist Society here right now, he would definitely gasp in shock upon seeing this pill. Called the Bone Healing Pill, it was said to be a miracle pill that could heal all injuries within 3 minutes. However, refining this pill wasn't difficult at all for an herbalist genius like Kevin. It was only one type of medicinal pill among many that he had refined the night before the battle. "We have a few minutes, so just sit down to recover for a bit. I'll keep a watch for us." Kevin vigilantly scanned his surroundings. He then took out another pill from his pocket and swallowed it without even checking what it was. From the moment they stepped foot on the island until now, they had already survived 3 rounds of elimination. In that span, many fierce battles had occurred all over the island, and as they moved from one section to another, they had come across several casualties from both the Foundation and the Vanguard. Despite this, Kevin still couldn't help but feel a little nauseous whenever he walked by a bloody corpse. While the 2 of them had managed to survive until now, part of him wondered how much more fighting they had to endure, and whether they would ultimately reach the end and emerge victorious. Although Kevin's strength was extraordinary, a fierce tiger was no match for a group of monkeys. Still, he had to do his best to protect Dalton's life, as well as his own. Back on the island, Kevin and Dalton Steele had just faced another group of warriors from the Vanguard. With Dalton suffering severe injuries during their last battle, Kevin had to carry him on his back to escape. To help him heal quickly, Kevin gave him a bone healing pill while taking another pill himself. With several casualties already on both sides and constantly being outnumbered by groups of warriors at a time, Kevin contemplated how much more fighting they still had to endure, and whether they would survive until the end to win the battle. Time quickly passed. About 10 minutes later, Kevin suddenly frowned. He then grabbed Dalton's shoulder with one hand and pulled him more than 30 feet. 5 figures slowly walked out of the bushes. Led by Oscar Brady, this was the same unit whom they had encountered earlier.
"We meet again. Are you going to try and run away and hide?"
Oscar Brady crossed his arms in front of his chest and raised his head to look at the two of them. "There's no enmity between us, so why are we forcing each other to fight?" Kevin narrowed his eyes and his entire body tensed up.
"Do you think mere ants like you are qualified to say such things to us?"
A deep voice sounded from behind Kevin and Dalton. A second later, another 2 women and 3 men emerged from the woods. Kevin was stunned when he sensed the intensity of the spiritual energy coming from their leader's body. A middle-stage level 5 expert. Kevin's heart started beating faster. The leader of the new group shot a disdainful glance at Kevin before shifting his gaze to Oscar while a disdainful, mocking smile emerged on his face.
"Oscar, are you really that incompetent? Why did you have to spend so much effort just to find and deal with these 2 ants?" "Troy Evans, what the hell are you doing here? And what did you just say? Don't think you can just insult me because of who your parents are."
Oscar seethed in anger as he clenched his fist tightly.
"How dare you use my family's name to insult me? Do you think you're worthy of calling them out?"
Troy Evans raised his eyebrows and asked. Oscar really hated his guts.
"You...
Oscar!" Marco Rudd hurriedly stopped Oscar, who was about to lash out at Troy, and added, "Now is not the time to engage in a fight with him. The elders of both the Vanguard and the Pinnacle are watching, so we have to prioritize winning the battle." Before Oscar could say anything, Troy tilted his head and glared at Marco.
"You're a member of the Rudd family, right?"
"That's right," Marco admitted without changing his expression. No one knew how much pressure he was facing right now. The Evans family was one of the top 5 most powerful families in the Pinnacle, and Troy was considered one of the top 10 warriors of the younger generation. In the past, he and Oscar Brady had been as close as brothers, and they were even dubbed as the twin stars of their generation. Unfortunately, they had a falling out because of a woman, and now as they both vied to be the one true leader of the Vanguard's junior members, their eyes were filled with contempt whenever they saw each other. Given this, Troy Evans was considered an amazing talent. With the help of his family's resources, he was already able to break through as a level 5 expert at the age of just 20.
"It seems like the Rudd family is becoming more and more useless. They're actually willing to let one of their descendants follow such an incompetent person. Instead of learning how to hunt for meat with a wolf, you're only eating the crap of this dog."
Troy didn't mince words as he insulted both of them at the same time. "You'd better get the hell out of here before you regret it. Stop causing trouble and dragging my family's name into this," Marco sneered back.
"Troy, you've gone too far with your insults. If you have the guts, just come at me."
Oscar's eyes began to turn bloodshot. The atmosphere around them suddenly became even more tense as it seemed that Oscar Brady and Troy Evans were ready to fight each other at any moment.
"What's going on?"
Dalton looked at the 2 groups of Vanguard warriors in confusion. "I don't know either. It seems that they have their own internal issues to deal with," Kevin replied as he helplessly spread his hands. Being caught in the middle of this situation, the 2 of them were dumbfounded and didn't know what to do as they could neither advance nor retreat. Suddenly, Kevin's eyes lit up. When Dalton saw this, he instantly became nervous. He knew that Kevin was up to something mischievous again. About that, why don't you guys settle this matter first amongst yourselves? The two of us will just leave to give you some space. Kevin took 2 steps forward and casually remarked. Everyone's eyes suddenly fell upon him when they heard what he said.
Did I say that you could leave?
Oscar gritted his teeth. He was so mad that he almost spat out these words. Is that decision really up to you? Kevin suddenly glanced at Oscar Brady. He then turned around and nodded at Troy Evans with a smile. Mr. Evans, right? I can tell that you're a wolf among ordinary men as someone with amazing talent. I'm sure you can easily trample ants like us, so why don't you let us live for a little while longer? You should first take care of that man over there who doesn't seem to know what's good for him. Once you've dealt with him, then you can come after us. I'm sure it won't waste much of your energy when the time comes. Kevin showered Troy Evans with a stream of compliments which stunned Dalton when he heard it. I don't believe he'll still have the nerve to kill us after praising him so much, Kevin thought to himself. Sure enough, this made Troy Evans feel like he was on cloud 9. All these years he had heard countless flattering words from his family, teachers, and peers. However, it felt especially good to be praised by someone from the Foundation, even if he was just a mere ant like Kevin. Troy Evans' teammates were also stunned by this. Although they were all powerful warriors in their own right, their families weren't as powerful as the Evans family. Thus, they decided to follow Troy and make sure to praise him constantly in order to get in his good graces. That way, as Troy would rise up the ranks, they were hoping that he would bring them along with him as well. However, compared to receiving compliments from Kevin, the difference in Troy Evans' reception was like night and day. Only now did they realize that bootlicking was also a type of skill that could be used to curry favor with one's enemies. At the same time, Marco Rudd and the others didn't expect that Kevin would change factions so quickly. Such a blatant act of betrayal was truly unheard of.
You're right. Killing you is no different than pinching an ant to death. I'll let you live for a few more hours, and then I shall take your life in the end.
Troy raised his head and declared proudly. Thank you, Mr. Evans. You're truly a magnanimous and worthy leader of the Vanguard's younger generation. We'll leave now to get out of your way, Kevin responded in a friendly manner. But to waste your time trying to reason with these disrespectful people, I feel that they're not worth keeping alive.
I also feel that they're not worth saving. You may leave. Leave these people for me to deal with.
Troy waved his hand at Kevin and Dalton. All right. See you later. Kevin smiled and was about to leave.
Stop! I never gave you my permission to leave.
Oscar couldn't hold his temper any longer. Being insulted by Troy Evans had already made him very angry, but he didn't expect that the people of the Foundation would dare to ignore his authority as well. Kevin turned back to Troy and revealed a troubled expression. Mr. Evans, this...
I asked them to leave. Do you have any objections?
Troy took a step forward and arrived in front of Kevin and Dalton, protecting them behind his back.
Troy, don't forget what our higher-ups have instructed us to do.
Oscar was infuriated. Why was he taking Kevin's side all of a sudden?
I don't need you to think about my welfare. You should think about your own safety. Today I shall prove that I'm the one who's worthy of Heather.
Troy suddenly drew out a long sword with his right hand, and as he channeled his spiritual energy into his weapon, its blade emitted a blue light. As Troy Evans waved his sword around, a powerful pressure surrounded them as he prepared to attack Oscar Brady and his unit. Sensing the animosity between Oscar Brady and Troy Evans, Kevin suggested that he and Dalton Steele should leave to give them some space to settle their dispute. When Oscar refused, Kevin started praising Troy with flattering compliments to curry favor with him. Overjoyed by Kevin's compliments, Troy agreed to spare their lives for the time being and allowed them to leave. Insulted by this, Oscar stopped Kevin and Dalton once again. As Troy stepped in front of them to confront him, Oscar reminded him not to disregard their higher-ups' instructions. However, Troy advised him to worry about his own safety and vowed to prove himself worthy of Heather Wallace. He then brought out a sword and was prepared to fight Oscar and his unit. Such a scene surprised everyone, especially Oscar Brady and his unit. After all, he and Troy Evans were the ones who belonged to the same faction. Moreover, before setting foot on the island, the generals of the Vanguard had personally given them an order. With the Foundation's most elite junior members gathered there, the Vanguard's own representatives had been instructed to kill every single one of them at any cost. Acting on behalf of the Pinnacle, the Vanguard's invasion of Chicago wasn't as easy as they had imagined. Despite their numbers, the defensive line formed by the numerous schools of the Foundation had proven to be a huge hindrance that prevented their forces from reaching the lakeshore. This was the reason why the higher-ups had thought of holding this battle to determine the outcome of the war. That way, even if the strategy ended in failure, the younger generation of the Foundation would still suffer severe losses. And by effectively hampering the Foundation's growth in the next few decades, all the Pinnacle needed to do was wait until the older generation died off before striking once again. By then, their invasion would no longer face any hindrances, allowing them to successfully return after so many years in exile. Given this objective, Oscar Brady didn't expect Troy Evans to be so conceited and short-sighted that he would prioritize his own interests at a time like this. It only took some flattering words from Kevin for him to completely forget about the mission that they had been given and want to have a fight to the death with him here instead. Seeing this as a blatant act of insubordination and betrayal, Oscar was left with no choice but to fight back. With storm clouds approaching above them, Oscar took a deep breath as his demeanor gradually turned somber.
All right, if that's what you want, then let's have a quick showdown today to prove which one of us is truly worthy of Heather.
Oscar accepted Troy's challenge as he kept the purple lightning spear and drew another spear from his back.
Isn't that the electric wolf spear? No one has used it in combat for many years.
Marco Rudd couldn't help but exclaim. The electric wolf spear was considered a legendary weapon, and it had been passed down from generation to generation in Oscar Brady's family. Kevin frowned slightly and stared at the long spear in Oscar's hand. He clearly remembered that there were detailed records of it that he had found in the secret books in his possession. According to legend, in the event of a storm, the electric wolf spear could act as a metal conductor that could control the direction of lightning, allowing each strike to instantly kill one's opponents. At first, Kevin thought that this weapon had long been lost and only remained in stories from the past. He didn't expect that someone would actually take it out right in front of him today.
Are you already going to use your almighty spear so soon? Other than relying on family heirlooms, what other abilities do you have?
Troy slowly raised the sword in his hand and used his other hand to take out some powder from his pocket.
Retreat quickly. That's Troy Evans' signature concoction, Heart's Desire powder.
Marco loudly called out, urging the rest of his unit to get out of there. When they saw this, even the 4 experts who came with Troy also quickly dispersed. However, Kevin and Dalton were caught off guard and unable to react in time. As they were the closest to Troy, they were immediately put into a trance as he blew the Heart's Desire powder all around him. Because of this, Kevin felt like his mind was starting to go blank. Instead of focusing on surviving and winning the battle for the Foundation, those thoughts were completely swept away by his love for Lily like a surging tide. As such, he instantly wanted to give up everything and return to the hospital to be with her. Still not knowing whether Lily would ever wake up, feelings of regret and guilt had also seeped into Kevin's heart. Suddenly, Kevin's spiritual energy surrounded him, making his whole body twitch a few times. It was as if he was subconsciously trying to fight back against the effects of the trance that he had been put in. He then regained his senses enough to realize that he had been affected by the Heart's Desire powder. With that, he forcefully bit the tip of his tongue, using the piercing pain to wake himself up. "Dalton, how are you?" Kevin quickly turned around and asked with concern. Unfortunately, Dalton didn't have a strength. Still affected by Troy's powder, he just stood there with a silly smile on his face and was even drooling a little bit. Dalton then called out,
"Miranda, why are you calling? I'm with Kevin right now. Don't worry, after we both finish our work, I'll take you to a ranch in the southwest to herd cows and ride horses."
Kevin's brows furrowed when he heard this. Why didn't he know that Dalton had such thoughts? But now that they were in the midst of a precarious situation, Kevin had to find a way to wake him up as soon as possible. Given this, he forcefully slapped Dalton's shoulder and transferred some of his spiritual energy to it. At this time, Troy also noticed what Kevin was doing. A trace of surprise flashed across his eyes and a smile appeared on his face.
"What an interesting guy,"
Troy thought to himself. Since the Heart's Desire powder was his special concoction, he knew better than anyone how powerful it was. It could tap into someone's heart and mind to reveal whatever that person truly cared about the most. Up until now, he had never met anyone who had no deep desires. And aside from using this information to threaten his opponents, it was also a good way to distract them from a quick defeat. However, the fact that Kevin was able to escape from his trance impressed Troy. For his concoction to have failed, Kevin must have had a strong enough power base to overcome its effects, which was a rare feat for someone from the younger generation. Meanwhile, Oscar Brady narrowed his eyes. After being able to retreat and avoid the powder's effects a moment ago, he swiftly shot out like a cannonball as he rushed back toward Troy. Since Troy's current power base was very high, if Oscar wanted to defeat him, he couldn't afford to be careless. He knew that he had to be completely focused and seize every opportunity. Normally, whoever struck first usually gained an advantage over their opponent by striking some amount of fear in them. However, Troy was no ordinary person. After sensing that Oscar was about to attack, he didn't retreat to widen the distance between them. Instead, he instantly lunged forward to meet him. With a blue light bursting out from the sword in his hand, it clearly seemed as though Troy was looking forward to fighting his rival. At the same time, it had begun to rain heavily, and Oscar's electric wolf spear was wrapped up with dense lightning that was conducted from the sky. As he waved this weapon in his hand, he let out a loud and fierce roar as he approached Troy. With the showdown between the two of them on the verge of breaking out, everyone who was watching from both sides was dazzled by this spectacle, as legendary weapons and elite maneuvers were unleashed. As for Dalton, he still remained in a trance despite Kevin's best efforts to help him regain his senses. "What the hell? Why aren't you awake yet?" Kevin retracted his arm from Dalton's shoulder and took a step back. Suddenly, he thought of another idea. A second later, a powerful slap landed on Dalton's face. After stumbling back 7 or 8 steps, he finally woke up.
"Kevin, what just happened?"
Dalton couldn't stay calm anymore after feeling a burning pain in his cheek.
"Was it Oscar who hit me?"
He wasn't used to this feeling. In the past, he had always been the one who slapped others, and up until just now, he had never been slapped by anyone before. "I don't have time to explain things to you right now. We have to take this opportunity to escape." Kevin looked at the fierce battle unfolding in front of them and immediately began to search for a way out for them. Although he looked as steady as a mountain on the surface, he was actually panicking like a child deep inside. At the moment, the two of them were surrounded by too many level 5 warriors, so he didn't dare to start a fight against them. Without having any idea how many of the Foundation's representatives were still alive, he couldn't count on anyone to come to their aid. Since the Vanguard's junior members were too powerful, the only way to escape was to gather all of them together somehow. Only then would they have a chance of survival. Just as Kevin was about to take a step forward, he and Dalton were stopped by Marco, Rudd, and the others, who were only a couple of feet away from them.
"Oscar said that you guys can't leave, so I can't let you go."
Marco looked at the two of them coldly and called out. "Is that so?" Kevin chuckled. He then turned around and shouted at Troy Evans' men. Mr. Evans told us that we could leave, but these guys won't let us. Kevin added, I'm telling you this not because I want to live, but because they dared to disrespect and disobey Mr. Evans. What are you going to do about it? Kevin was smart enough to realize that these two groups of warriors obviously hated one another, and if he was able to provoke them to fight against each other, then he and Dalton would be able to leave safely. As for his brown-nosing, it was no big deal to him. Anyway, wasn't there a good saying? If you want to live, you must be willing to do whatever it takes to survive. As expected, when Troy's men heard this, they quickly rushed over and blocked the path of Marco and the others.
Mr. Evans already allowed them to leave. Are you sure that you want to go against his wishes?
One of the men said coldly.
Dustin Newman, stop pretending to act dumb and looking for an excuse to fight us. Don't think that just because you're following Troy, you can come out and do whatever you want.
Marco's temper immediately rose.
Be careful. If you offend me, I'll have no choice but to make you regret it. That'll depend on whether you have the ability or not.
Dustin glanced at Kevin and Dalton and pointed toward a clear path of escape.
You two get out of here right now. I want to see who dares to stop you.
With Troy Evans and Oscar Brady about to fight, Kevin saw this as an opportunity to escape. Given that they were still surrounded by several level 5 warriors from the Vanguard, Kevin had to come up with a way to distract them. Because they were all so loyal to their leaders, he then decided to use their hatred for one another to provoke them. When Marco Rudd stopped Kevin and Dalton from escaping, Kevin turned to Dustin Newman and asked him if he was going to let Oscar's unit disrespect Troy's wishes. As things got heated between the two, Dustin told Kevin and Dalton to leave immediately to see if Marco would dare to stop them. When Kevin saw the tense scene in front of him, he laughed heartily. He then decided to add fuel to the fire in order to push these people over the edge and fight one another. Forget it. I know that you're kind enough to let us leave, but I don't want to. Now that Mr. Evans isn't here to protect your unit, I'm sure that Marco and the others are no longer afraid of you, Kevin said as he lowered his head and sighed. Besides, you shouldn't let the harmony between your groups be destroyed by 2 members of the Foundation. And even if you wanted to defend your leader, I understand your difficulties. Given that your abilities are limited, you won't be strong enough to deter them. The moment his voice fell, Dustin's facial expression turned ugly.
Do you think I need Mr. Evans' help to deal with these fools?
Dustin sneered in a cold voice. As I said, they don't seem to be threatened by you at all. Kevin paused for a moment, then he revealed a mischievous look. Unless, do you have a vicious side that we don't know about?
Don't worry. The 2 of you can go in peace. Leave this to me. If anyone dares to stop you, I'll break their legs.
Dustin waved his right hand, then emphatically inserted his knife into the ground with the other.
You.
Marco was so angry that he couldn't help but point at Dustin with a trembling finger.
What's the matter with you? Were my words not clear enough?
Dustin pulled out his knife from the ground. He then took 2 steps forward and played around with the blade in his hand. All right, then we'll go now. Come on, Dalton. Kevin smiled and led Dalton into the woods.
Stop.
Marco wanted to chase after them. But before he could move, Dustin had already arrived in front of him.
Did you really not understand what I just said, or are you just stupid enough not to take my words seriously?
Dustin warned. At the same time, the battle between Troy Evans and Oscar Brady was still going on like a raging fire. Given their history, both of them knew each other's moves very well as they fought back and forth. The shock waves caused by their clash caused all the trees nearby to sway violently, and clouds of dust to appear all over. Upon seeing this footage on their monitor, the leaders at the Foundation's Lakeshore base camp were at a loss for words. They couldn't understand what method Kevin had used to cause internal conflicts among the people of the Vanguard.
This kid is really good at playing the game.
Harley Shepard didn't know how else to describe his strategy.
He's made use of all the opportunities available to him thus far.
Wayne Ford saw through their weak points. He then paused for a second before adding,
But for Kevin, the real danger has just begun.
At the same time, in a mansion on the outskirts of Chicago, Brett Stewart was sitting in the courtyard reading a book in peace. Suddenly, Roger Knott hurriedly entered. "Greetings, Supreme Commander." Roger Knott respectfully knelt down and lowered his head to him.
"Roger, get up. I've already told you there's no need for such formalities between the two of us."
Brett put down the book in his hand and helped him up from the ground.
"There's something that I need to tell you that I hope you're prepared to hear."
Roger hesitated for a moment, not knowing how to say it out loud.
"You want to talk about what happened to Milton and the other two, right?"
Brett revealed a sly smile behind his words.
"Supreme Commander, you already know about this?"
Roger asked in surprise. Half an hour ago, Roger Knott was giving instructions to some of the Myriads members when he suddenly received a message. Milton Brown, Viola Garcia, and Alan Baker were suddenly attacked on the way back from their visit to the Alliance's headquarters. So far, no one knew who was behind the attack. Given that the three of them had a high status in the Myriads, knowing that their lives were put in danger could affect the nerves of many members.
"Of course I do, and I knew it long before everyone else. Also, I'm sure that Milton and the others won't be coming back."
Brett sat back down in his chair, picked up a cup of coffee from the table, and slowly drank it.
"Why do you say so, sir? And how did you find out in the first place?"
Roger frowned slightly. Without waiting for Brett to answer his question, he suddenly understood why. Out of everyone, Milton Brown and the other two were specifically chosen by Brett Stewart to visit the Alliance's headquarters. During this period of time, their faction had been severely quashed and dismantled. Moreover, something bad happened to the three of them on their way back. Was it too much of a coincidence? Brett simply smiled and drank his coffee without saying a word.
Supreme Commander, were you really the one behind this?"
Roger's forehead was covered in cold sweat as he stammered.
"Right now, there are many fresh and able candidates in the Myriads who wish to ascend and join the higher ranks. If the older generation doesn't give way, then how would they have a chance?"
Brett slowly put down the cup of coffee in his hand and remarked as if he was talking about a small matter.
"Your explanation makes sense, Supreme Commander."
Although Roger looked calm on the surface, he knew deep down that he was actually treading on thin ice. Just as Brett had said, if the new generation wanted to rise, they could only replace the older generation. Roger could tell that Brett wanted to fortify and grow his own faction within the Myriads. By slowly replacing key positions with his loyal subordinates, Brett could ensure that there would be no threats to his power. While he had only chosen to target Milton Brown for now, what would he do if Brett wanted to deal with him in the future? At that moment, Brett glanced at him, then said,
"Anyway, you came here at just the right time. I have something else to discuss with you today."
"What is it, sir?" Roger instinctively lowered his head.
"Right now, the 10 grade schools are all gathered in Chicago. Even if the Pinnacle is defeated, the major schools will surely suffer a great loss. What will happen if they get attacked again by someone?"
Brett raised his head to look at Roger.
"Are you saying that you want to attack the 10 grade schools?"
Roger was even more shocked to hear this. In the courtyard of the Swinton family's mansion in St. Louis, Richard Swinton and Alan Williams were sitting in chairs drinking coffee.
"Alan, what do you think about Brenda?"
When Richard Swinton saw Brenda Swinton practicing with her sword not far away, a doting smile appeared on his face. Ever since Thornton Huxley left the Swinton family's mansion, Gail Swinton had kept herself locked up in her room all day long. Within their family, only Catherine Swinton could talk to her, and with the two of them silently disgruntled with her, they hadn't seen each other for days. Despite this, Richard took this opportunity to spend some quality time with his older daughter. After all, Brenda was already in her 20s, and he figured that he wouldn't have many chances to bond with her in the future once she moved out of the house.
"Your daughter is naturally outstanding."
Alan Williams looked at Brenda Swinton with a hint of regret between his furrowed brows. If Kevin wasn't already married, he would naturally want to fulfill his promise to Richard to try and set him up with her.
"I'm glad to hear that. So, do you think there is any of a chance of a future with Kevin?"
Richard asked with a smile. Richard, I'm sorry, but that cannot happen. Alan frowned and explained. Kevin is already married to Lily. I know that Kevin only has Lily in his heart. Upon hearing this, Richard suddenly laughed.
I understand. But I do understand that he hasn't exactly been treated well by the people of the Jones family, especially his mother-in-law.
But before Alan could respond, Richard added,
But more importantly, I also received news that Kevin's wife is currently lying unconscious in the hospital after a tragic car accident. And according to her doctor, Lily might remain in a coma for the rest of her life. It's such a shame, and they're both still so young. How difficult would it be for him to stay married for the sake of a woman who will never wake up? Wouldn't he be so lonely?
Alan frowned and fell into deep thought. It was precisely because he knew how the Jones family treated Kevin that he didn't show any concern after learning that Lily had a car accident. Moreover, he also felt that Richard hadn't said anything wrong. If Lily remained in a coma forever, then how would that affect Kevin going forward? What was he supposed to do then?
Speaking of which, Kevin and Brenda have been very close since they were kids, right?
Richard paused for a moment before continuing.
If you feel bad for Lily, we can just give her mother a large sum of money after the divorce and make arrangements with the hospital to take good care of her for the rest of her life.
Richard then patted the back of Alan's hand.
Alan, you and I are getting old now. All we want is for our children to be happy. I hope you understand I'm only trying to look out for Kevin's best interests. After all, if Lily never woke up, what kind of life would that be for Kevin? It wouldn't be fair to him.
I need to discuss this matter first with Susan. Alan didn't agree to anything directly.
Of course. Take all the time you need. There's no need to rush. I'm always here to talk if you need anything.
Richard smiled happily once again. Inside Adriana Wright's office, Spencer was standing in front of the window looking at the scenery outside. In the meeting room next to him, Adriana Wright was currently discussing matters with many wealthy families who all had one thing in common. They had all received Kevin's warning. Even the heads of those families who had suffered casualties had come. At first, everyone thought that Kevin wouldn't do anything too overboard in his efforts to find the culprit behind Emo Squire's attack. However, reality proved them entirely wrong. While it was rare for Kevin to show himself, he had used the vast resources in his hands to launch a catastrophic blow to their families. Half an hour later, the group left the West Chicago International Group's building with solemn expressions on their faces.
So, did they manage to prove their innocence, or has no one still found anything that can help us?
Spencer asked as he looked at Adriana as soon as she entered the room. Unfortunately, everyone's situation is the same. Despite using all of their connections, none of them were able to discover the true culprit acting behind the scenes. Adriana crossed her arms in front of her chest and sighed with a serious expression.
Have the surveillance cameras been thoroughly checked?
Spencer suddenly thought of this. Xavier Marshall has already reviewed the footage several times, and he managed to trace the whereabouts of the van that dropped Emo in the suburbs. But when they found it, the van had already been burned from the inside out. Adriana told him everything.
And we already ran through everyone on your list of suspects, right?
Spencer kept thinking about everything he knew about Emo Squire since he had come to Chicago. Sometimes when he felt stuck on a problem, Spencer knew that the best thing to do was to think back in case there was something that he missed the first time. Spencer, what's wrong with you? Don't you already know all these things? Adriana asked in confusion.
Something's fishy. Are you really sure that we covered all the possible suspects? I feel like we may have missed an important detail or two. We must prepare to investigate this matter again.
Spencer immediately dialed Xavier Marshall's number. The content of the call was very simple. Since someone wanted to hide behind the scenes, they couldn't stop until they were able to get to the bottom of this. And this time, they wouldn't show any mercy at all. Suddenly, a man quickly ran into the office and whispered something into Spencer's ear. Although Adriana didn't hear what he said, she saw Spencer's facial expression slowly go from disbelief to anger before finally turning dead serious. What happened? Adriana couldn't help but ask.
You can go now.
Spencer patted his subordinate's shoulder and then turned to Adriana and said,
You have to be mentally prepared for what I'm about to share with you.
My subordinates have discovered that before Emo Squire was attacked, the last person he saw was actually the owner of the Whistler Hotel, Mitchell Cook. Adriana was stunned when she heard that. Her eyes instantly widened with dread, and her body trembled all over as she thought about the grave implications of this new piece of information. After sifting through all of the heads of the wealthy families who were on her list of possible suspects, Adriana told Spencer that despite using all of their connections, they still couldn't find the true culprit behind Emo Squire's attack. Sensing that they had missed something and that they hadn't covered all of the possible suspects, Spencer called Xavier Marshall to talk about restarting their investigation. Just then, one of his subordinates ran into the office and whispered something into his ear. He then revealed that the last person Emo saw before being attacked was actually Mitchell Cook. Stunned by this, Adriana was deeply troubled as she thought about its grave implications. No, it can't be him. Mitch has known us for many years and he treats us like his own family. He would never attack Emo. Adriana shook her head in disbelief. As the oldest among them, Mitchell Cook was also the first one in their trusted circle who had helped Kevin establish a foothold in Chicago. When Kevin was ostracized by the Williams family, Adriana and the others moved to Chicago, and from the moment they arrived, it was Mitchell Cook who helped them more than anyone else. In their eyes, Mitchell Cook was like a big brother to them. As such, Adriana didn't believe that he would ever do anything to harm Emo Squire.
I didn't say that it was definitely him who did it, but as the last person who Mr. Squire saw, it does make Mr. Cook the most suspicious one out of everyone. So we have to be open to the possibility and add him to our list of suspects.
Spencer carefully explained the situation.
Also, I don't know if you noticed, but ever since the incident with Mr. Squire, Mr. Cook has not shown up at the hospital to visit him or even come by here to offer his help with the investigation.
Without any ties to Mitchell Cook, Spencer's expression and tone didn't change at all as he objectively stated these facts. Upon hearing this, Adriana didn't refute his words. The more she thought about it, it seemed as if what Spencer had said did make some sense. In the past, if something bad had happened to them, Mitchell Cook wouldn't hesitate to reach out and comfort them personally, even if they weren't that noticeably affected by it. However, after Emo Squire's incident, Mitchell Cook only made a brief phone call and nothing more. And his lack of concern now made Adriana look back and think deeply about this uncharacteristic change.
I don't know much about Mr. Cook, and he is Mr. Williams' trusted associate. Since Xavier Marshall and I can't confront him about it, I shall leave this matter to you.
Spencer paused for a moment, then added,
Don't worry, I'll send someone to protect you. As for the rest of the possible suspects, if we find that any of them were truly involved in Mr. Squire's attack, then leave it to us to deal with them accordingly.
Adriana sat on the sofa and stared blankly into the distance as she tried to process all of this information. At the moment, her mind was a mess, and she felt as if she didn't have any idea who she could trust or what was going on anymore. With that, Spencer didn't say anything else as he nodded and slowly walked out of the office. At the same time, in his office at the Whistler Hotel, Mitchell Cook had just finished processing some documents when the door was suddenly pushed open from the outside. A man quickly walked in and respectfully handed a folder over to him.
Has everything been taken care of?
Mitchell Cook asked without looking up.
Everything has been settled. Drake has gone overseas to start a new life and use some of the money you gave him to open a bar.
The man answered respectfully.
How's the situation in Chicago?
Mitchell nodded and asked. He had been staying in his hotel for the past 2 days and hadn't asked about what was going on outside until now. The man hesitated for a moment, then gritted his teeth and responded,
Since dropping by the hospital, President Williams hasn't been seen anywhere in the city. We aren't sure where he is at the moment. However, it seems that President Wright has gone mad because of Mr. Squire's attack. More than 10 families in Chicago have suffered casualties as a result of her investigation. It's been brutal. She's even sacrificed her own men in exchange for their lives. The man continued. In addition, Dominic Archer has quickly consolidated his strength and gathered all of his henchmen at the Archer family's mansion. Gwen Archer also hurried back there about half an hour ago. Upon hearing all of these updates, Mitchell Cook, who was flipping through some documents, suddenly paused and looked up.
Hold on. Who did you say had gone mad?
Mitchell asked in disbelief. It's President Wright, sir. She found some ruthless people to conduct the investigation on her behalf. And as long as it was a family that had offended Mr. Squire or President Williams in some capacity, no one was safe unless they were able to prove their innocence. In fact, even Dominic Archer was attacked. And if it were not for some of his men saving him, he very well may have been killed as well. The man didn't dare to hide anything and told Mitchell all the information he had gathered.
Are you sure you didn't make a mistake?
Mitchell put down the documents in his hand and frowned. After all, he knew Adriana Wright very well. Not counting Rachel, Adriana was arguably the most innocent person in Kevin's trusted circle. And in the corporate world, she had always acted with honesty and integrity while despising those who cheated their way to the top behind the scenes. Her moral values were reflected in the West Chicago International Group, which didn't operate or associate itself with any shady characters. Everything that I've said is true, sir. And now her actions have caused everyone in the city a lot of anxiety to the point that even the police have stepped in. As such, I'm afraid that things may be a little difficult to handle. The man reported with some embarrassment. After a few seconds of silence, Mitchell Cook finally digested everything that he had just been told. He then rubbed his forehead and told the man to leave. Given what he knew, how could he not see the truth of the matter? This wasn't something that Adriana could do on her own at all. Instead, it must be Kevin who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Suddenly, Mitchell hurriedly took out his phone and made a call. Meanwhile, the second to the last round of the battle on the island had just ended. With the outer areas already being attacked from outside in accordance with the rules, there weren't many safe zones left to either hide or fight. This forced the remaining warriors from both sides to concentrate themselves closer to the center of the island. At the moment, there were only a dozen experts left from the Vanguard and fewer than 30 representing the Foundation. Just like Troy Evans and Oscar Brady, most of the Vanguard's junior members were overly focused on receiving what they believed to be their due credit. Because of this, several of them died because of their personal grudges with one another. In order to avoid the same fate, the Foundation's warriors finally realized that the key to victory was to be united and work as a team. Given this, the remaining survivors had all gathered about 10 minutes ago, preparing to fight the last of the Vanguard's experts together. With one final round to go, this was a do-or-die situation for them all. Other than Kevin and Dalton, who had the support of medicinal pills and were in relatively good condition, almost all of them had various injuries by this point.
In just a few moments, we shall face a truly fierce battle. And the end result of this ultimate showdown won't just affect our own fate, but it will also determine the final outcome of this entire war, and whether the Pinnacle will continue to attack our land or not.
Calvin Morris announced as he stood on a rock. He added,
As the saying goes, a team cannot be without a leader. With my extraordinary talent, I, Calvin Morris, believe that I have the ability to be your leader. That being said, are all of you willing to follow my lead and listen to my orders? Together, I promise that we'll fight the enemy with all our strength and rightfully claim our victory.
Kevin and Dalton, who stood at the back of the crowd, showed no signs of opposition or support. But there were others who thought differently and had strong opinions. This was especially the case for Sebastian Young, Clarissa Pratt, and Clyde Davis, all of whom Kevin had previously opted to spare from death.
As soon as they woke up and regained consciousness, the three of them rushed toward the center of the island without stopping, and along the way they encountered a few units from the vanguard. In order to survive, they had to fight with all their might and just barely managed to get by. Humbled by the strength of the vanguard's younger generation, they no longer dared to approach this battle with any sense of arrogance or contempt in their hearts against Kevin anymore.
"Why should you be the one leading us? Shouldn't that person be determined by the rest of us in a more democratic way?"
Clyde Davis immediately cried out in dissatisfaction. This drew several reactions from their fellow warriors as the crowd instantly became raucous.
"What extraordinary abilities do you have? How can you say that you're better than Calvin Morris?"
One of them sneered.
"Sebastian Young is an expert at the Southwest School of Healing. As Wayne Ford's top student, his combat abilities and strategies are all first rate. If we need a leader, it should be him,"
another suggested.
"What's going on? Now is not the time to fight for power and glory. After all, our lives can't be taken lightly,"
a third one pleaded. As the group of people continued to voice their opinions and discuss amongst themselves, Kevin felt like he was going to get a headache from all this noise. He really didn't know what these people were thinking. How can they still selfishly think about power in the face of death? Hadn't they already agreed not to let their personal interests get in the way? Even if they currently outnumbered the Vanguard's remaining forces, the Foundation could just as easily lose more than a few lives if they continued to argue like this.
"All of you shut up."
Calvin's face darkened in anger. He wasn't expecting that there would be anyone who would dare to refute him.
"With my name alone, I can definitely lead all of you to victory. Do any of you really think that any of your schools can hold a candle to the Morris family?"
Everyone shut their mouths when they heard this. They had heard about the formidable strength of the Morris family before. And over the course of this battle, they could see that none of the 5 people who were personally led by Calvin Morris had fallen.
"The Morris family is undoubtedly very powerful, but the reputation of your family alone can't guarantee that you'll be able to save everyone's lives,"
Sebastian Young said as he slowly walked out from the crowd.
"Actually, I don't believe that I have the ability to lead everyone, but I know someone who does. Whether it's in terms of strength or strategy, he'll surely crush everyone in his path."
For a moment, everyone's eyes were fixated on him, not knowing who he was talking about. Sebastian then searched the crowd for a while before finally locking his eyes on one person.
"Kevin, I hope you can come forward and lead everyone out of this mess."
Sebastian called him out loudly. Upon hearing this, Calvin's eyes narrowed in contempt. He had been looking for Kevin since the very beginning of this battle, wanting to follow him into the shadows and kill him while he was busy fighting the experts of the Vanguard. Unfortunately, Kevin was too smart and elusive, and so Calvin never had the chance to carry out his plan. When Sebastian mentioned Kevin's name, the experts of the Morris family looked as if they wanted to attack him right then and there. They then gave Calvin Morris an inquiring look and waited for his signal. However, they were subtly rejected by Calvin. The reason was very simple. With everyone watching, if they attacked now, they would be surely cast out as traitors by the Foundation. In that case, even if they were lucky enough to emerge victorious in the end, they would still get in big trouble once they had left the island. Meanwhile, Clarissa Pratt and Clyde Davis also nodded in approval at Kevin. Aside from being spared from death by him, the reason why the two of them supported was very simple. Not only was Kevin's power base high enough, but he had also convinced them that he was worthy of being a leader both physically and mentally. "Are you talking about me?" Kevin pointed at his chest and asked in a daze. He had never thought that this matter would involve him.
"Kevin, I believe in you. You're our only hope."
Sebastian encouraged him sincerely as if he had forgotten about everything that had previously happened between them. "That's definitely not a good idea." Kevin quickly waved his hand in refusal. At this time, the others who didn't know who Kevin was expressed their disapproval.
"Who is this guy? How come I've never even heard of him?"
One of them protested.
"Look at him. He's probably from one of those wealthy families and only became an expert through connections, having paid off his school's dean,"
another one mocked.
Can you believe the nerve of this guy? How can he lead us? He'll only lead us straight to our deaths. I think that Calvin is the much better option."
A third one added. These people's belittling words were something that Dalton Steele could no longer bear to listen to. With that, he suddenly took out his fusion hammers. Calvin Morris had nominated himself to become the Foundation's leader for the final round of the battle. However, when Sebastian Young argued that Kevin was more worthy instead, Calvin secretly seethed in anger for not being able to kill him yet, while the other warriors didn't know who Kevin was and mocked him in disapproval.
"Whoever has the guts to say one more word against Kevin will face my wrath. I'll break your legs right now,"
Dalton roared. Compared to him, Kevin was much calmer. He quickly patted his shoulder to get him to cool down and said, "Dalton, don't be so petty. Let them say what they want about me. It's okay."
"How can you tolerate their insults, Kevin? They don't know what you're capable of,"
Dalton grumbled angrily. Now is not the time to care about one's reputation. Kevin then seriously turned his head to address everyone. "It doesn't matter if you don't have respect for who I am. Anyway, I never had any ambitions of becoming your leader. Since Calvin Morris has graciously offered to lead you, you should follow him."
"Kevin!"
Sebastian opened his mouth and wanted to say something. However, Kevin waved his hand and interrupted him. "Calvin comes from a powerful family, and with his extraordinary skills and strength, he's indeed suitable to lead the Foundation's team. However, I fight better when I can move freely, and I'm not used to moving in big groups. Therefore, we shall meet again in the end." The meaning behind Kevin's words was very clear. Since these people clearly did not want to be led by him, he wasn't willing to work with them either. Despite what he had told Dalton just now, he still cared about his reputation. After all, he was only human. Sebastian was the first to react. He then looked at Calvin Morris with a smile on his face.
"I agree with Kevin. Although it's good to work together, if we are all together and we get ambushed, then we'll all be completely wiped out. It's better to split up into two groups. That will increase our odds of winning."
Following Sebastian, Clarissa Pratt and Clyde Davis also passed through the crowd to stand beside Kevin.
"Looks like you three have learned your lesson."
Dalton didn't even look at them as he uttered under his breath in disdain.
"Kevin, this is a crucial moment for the Foundation. So I hope that we can work closely together regardless of what happened in the past. Let's put aside our personal grudges for now and wait until we get out of here alive,"
Sebastian stated righteously. Kevin smiled but didn't say anything. He just looked at the three of them quietly. Until now, he didn't really think much about their strength and abilities. However, since they were able to survive up until now, it only proved that they weren't as weak as he had thought. Perhaps the three of them had been holding back all this time, especially Sebastian Young and Clarissa Pratt, whom he had fought with earlier.
"All right, since the five of you wish to form your own team, we won't force you to join the rest of us. We hope to see you leave this island alive at the end of this battle."
A spiteful look flashed across Calvin Morris's eyes as he said this. With Kevin excluding himself from the Foundation's team, this was exactly what Calvin wanted. When the time came, this would give him a good opportunity to make his move and kill Kevin without anyone knowing. As such, Calvin had decided that he would send someone to keep an eye on Kevin after he set off with the others. As soon as there was an opening that he could take advantage of, he would seize his opportunity to make sure that Kevin wouldn't leave the island alive. This was because the talent that he had displayed was so shocking that even the elders of the Morris family had noticed Kevin's existence. "Calvin, everyone, I wish you all good luck. We shall meet you at the center of the island." Kevin revealed a smile. After briefly nodding his head at him, he turned around and left decisively, followed by Dalton Steele and the others. The remaining people were all from famous families within the Great Powers. Thus, it was natural for people like them to be conceited. But after seeing him in action, no one dared to stand out and refute Calvin Morris. Given this, all of them willingly accepted him as their leader and didn't hesitate to follow his orders. Meanwhile, the general of the Vanguard's camp was watching the footage of their junior members. The thing that worried him the most had finally happened. All of these kids were too arrogant. Not only did they not join forces to attack the young generation of the Foundation, but they had also forgotten about the one thing he had told them to do as they were too busy fighting amongst themselves. This caused the momentum to shift in the Foundation's favor. Although their last 12 warriors were all very powerful, it still wouldn't be easy for them to deal with the Foundation as they were outnumbered.
What a bunch of fools. How dare they call themselves elite experts with their arrogance and selfishness?
Jesse Sanchez scolded coldly. All right, that's enough. Now that things have come to this, no matter how much you scold them, it's useless. Besides, although we don't have the advantage in terms of numbers, the gap between our warriors and the Foundation's own isn't something that they can make up for. Samantha Harris held his arm and comforted him in a soft voice.
Troy Evans and Oscar Brady, those two idiots were actually tricked by the people of the Foundation. Look at them fighting each other like fools. How am I going to deal with them?
Jesse's eyes were filled with anger. Samantha shook her head helplessly. She then turned her head to watch the footage of the Foundation's remaining experts. Didn't you send someone to recruit the Alliance? Why haven't you used them? Samantha asked with a slight frown on her face.
Soon.
Jesse took a few deep breaths to calm his mind and explained.
Actually, the real purpose of this battle is to distract our opponent's attention. We've coordinated with the people of the Alliance to launch a surprise attack on the Foundation's base camp from behind, and then we'll send our forces back to the lake. By attacking them from both sides, the people of the Foundation will surely be caught off guard and fall apart.
Jesse's tone was firm. After spending a lot of effort to convince his superiors to agree to this plan, he couldn't afford to fail. Back on the island, Kevin and his teammates were running swiftly through the forest. They only stopped once they were far away from Calvin Morris and the rest of the Foundation.
Kevin, what do you think of Calvin Morris?
Sebastian Young suddenly patted his shoulder and asked. I haven't fought him before, so I still don't know how strong he is, Kevin remarked with a deep look in his eyes. But my gut tells me he's definitely far from being just an ordinary warrior. Compared to us who came from prestigious families, there are some things that you probably don't know, Clyde Davis snorted and then added. Calvin Morris is the illegitimate son of the Morris family's patriarch. Such an identity may have led him to be ostracized from those prestigious circles, but the extraordinary talent that he has shown since he was young made everyone shut their mouths. Hearing this, Kevin's interest was piqued. He turned around and looked at Clyde Davis, signaling him to continue. As the saying goes, only by knowing both yourself and your enemy can you fight 100 battles without losing a single one. Given that it had been really difficult for him to find someone to investigate the Morris family, it would be good if he could find out as much as possible right now. As everyone knows, formal training can begin as early as the age of 6. However, Calvin Morris only started when he was 10. From there, it only took him 3 years to break through as a level 3 expert. By 15, he was already a level 4 expert, and at 20 years old, he finally reached level 5. Although he has never shown his true strength in front of outsiders until now, no one will doubt his combat abilities. Clyde Davis then looked at Kevin with a serious face. Kevin, I know you're very powerful as well, but if you're thinking about provoking Calvin Morris, I would advise you against making an enemy out of him. When they heard this, Kevin and Dalton exchanged an awkward glance. After all, unlike the others who only became level 5 warriors after several years of training, they managed to do the same within less than a year through a combination of herbal pills and the opportunities that fell into their laps. Still, if what Clyde Davis said was true, then Calvin Morris's talent was really something to behold. If he had already broken through as a level 5 expert at the age of 20, then what might he be capable of by now? Wait, aren't these things supposed to be heavily guarded secret to the Morris family? How did you find out about it? Kevin scratched his head as he recalled what Clyde Davis had just said. However, just as he finished speaking, the three of them stared at Kevin as if they were looking at a fool. Do you really not know about this, or are you just pretending not to? Clarissa Pratt couldn't help but ask. Kevin suddenly felt a bit uneasy. He didn't want to answer her question. The Morris family may be quite elusive, but Calvin Morris's background is no secret within the Great Powers," Clarissa explained. "Anyway, the thing that matters the most is not the present, but the future. And a young genius like him has a limitless future, one that's beyond everyone's imagination. With his extraordinary talent and strength, he's surely a force to be reckoned with." After hearing this, Kevin quickly understood. Does this mean that Calvin Morris is actually the leader of their family?
Well, you can say that he's being groomed to be the Morris family's future head.
Sebastian Young found a rock and sat down.
However, the most important thing right now is not how to deal with Calvin Morris, but how we can survive the final round of this battle.
The atmosphere instantly became serious again as everyone fell silent. Dalton Steele looked around and suggested,
"I have an idea. Since there are only 5 of us, we can take our time and slowly move forward toward the center of the island. As soon as we see anyone from the vanguard, we run away immediately. That way we don't have to do anything but see who can last longer."
Can we even hide until the end? With the vanguard down to a dozen experts, what do you think the outcome of the battle will be when they fight against Calvin Morris and the others?
Sebastian wondered. Even though the Foundation's team has more warriors left, with Calvin Morris leading them, the vanguard will probably still have an 80% chance of winning, Kevin remarked as he crossed his arms in front of his chest.
Then let's go out and fight with them. The 5 of us surely can defeat them all.
Clyde clenched his fist and flexed his arms to show off his muscles. Even Calvin wouldn't dare to act that rashly. How many of them do you think we could take on if we really put our lives on the line? Clarissa glanced at him disapprovingly.
"This won't do. But what else do you think we can do?"
Dalton leaned on a tree and supported his head with his hands as he looked at Kevin and the others. No one came to answer him immediately as everyone felt stuck in a dilemma. If they could neither dodge nor fight, how were they going to beat the vanguard? After a few minutes of silence, Kevin suddenly shouted, "I've got it!" This gave everyone else a big scare, especially Dalton Steele and Clyde Davis.
"What happened to Kevin?"
Dalton scratched the back of his head and asked. "I have an idea, and will definitely benefit from some danger." Kevin's eyes lit up and his face revealed a mischievous smile. It was this expression that made the others have a bad feeling in their hearts. They all sensed that Kevin was going to do something risky again.
What do you have in mind?"
Sebastian stuttered as he spoke. Kevin laughed. From my observation, although the Vanguard's warriors are all strong individually, most of them fight separately. This is because there seem to be very deep grudges between their small units. "Don't tell me you want to cause internal strife among them?" Clarissa asked in a daze. "Dalton, do you remember Troy Evans?" Kevin didn't answer her and turned to Dalton instead.
"How could I forget about that stupid guy? If it wasn't for his help, we would probably still be wasting our time fighting that other guy with the electric spear,"
Dalton replied straightforwardly. "Why don't we look for Troy Evans now? Since we're on his good side, I'm sure he won't mind helping us get out of this predicament." Kevin slyly winked at him. Sebastian Young, Clarissa Pratt, and Clyde Davis all looked at the two of them blankly. They had no idea what they were talking about. Who was Troy Evans? They had never heard of him before. Did they have a 6th teammate from the Foundation that they didn't know about? At the same time, Dalton was dumbfounded. His head was shaking nonstop, and he even took a few steps back while staring at Kevin with his eyes wide open in disbelief.
"Kevin, don't tell me that you think he's that big of a fool. You've already used him once. No matter how stupid he may be to fall for your trick, he should be able to realize what you did by now. So if we go and find him again, won't we just be sending helpless lambs to a tiger's mouth?"
Dalton was extremely unwilling.
"I'm not going with you. I just want to find a place to hide and stay there. And if someone from the Vanguard finds me, then I'll just run as fast as I can when the time comes."
About that, can I ask you guys a question? Who and what exactly are you guys talking about?
Sebastian asked, interrupting their conversation. Only then did Dalton shift his gaze to them. After that, he told them everything about how Kevin had played a devious trick on Troy Evans to provoke a fight between him and Oscar Brady, along with their respective units. Upon hearing this, the three of them immediately jumped up from where they were seated, giving Kevin and Dalton befuddled looks. "Why do you still want to go back to Troy Evans after escaping from him? Aren't you afraid that he'll kill you this time? No matter what, he's still a member of the Vanguard." Clarissa swallowed her saliva. Only now did she realize how bold Kevin truly was. "That's absolutely impossible. After all, Troy has become a good buddy of mine," Kevin shamelessly remarked. The way he behaved made the rest of them start to feel a deep sense of regret. If they had known that this was going to be his plan earlier, they would definitely not have gone out of their way to join forces with Kevin. In the courtyard of the Swinton family's mansion in St. Louis, Alan and Susan Williams were sitting on a stone bench. Both of their faces looked extremely unpleasant. "Are you serious? Did Lily really get into a car accident?" Susan Williams sighed deeply and asked. "Richard has no reason to lie to me." Alan Williams hesitated for a moment and added, "Do you think Kevin knows about this?" Susan Williams didn't say anything, but her face was full of worry. After some time, Susan Williams remarked, "Does Kevin have any other ways to treat her? I want to go back to Chicago. No matter what Dorothy does to us, Lily is still our son's wife. And as her in-laws, we should at least go and see her." After hearing Susan's words, Alan suddenly frowned. To be honest, he had absolutely no objections to Lily being his daughter-in-law. In the few years that she had been married to Kevin, he had never had so much as a minor disagreement with her. It was just that he really did not want to associate with people like Dorothy. But with such a close family, Alan felt that it was inevitable. Susan looked at him and said, "Don't think so much. Worst case scenario, we just ignore Dorothy." As an old married couple for many years, Susan instantly saw through the thoughts in her husband's mind. "Forget it. She will definitely cause trouble again, but for Kevin, we just need to put up with her," Alan said as he sighed and rubbed his forehead. Susan smiled faintly. She knew that her husband had a sharp tongue but a soft heart. Susan looked around for one of the staff members. She seemed to have already gotten used to the life of being served. As soon as she did so, several staff members immediately came to her side. Kevin had asked Xavier Marshall to find someone to protect his parents. In addition, there were also a few female bodyguards that Emo Squire had carefully hired. "Yes, ma'am. Do you need something?" the leading female bodyguard asked respectfully. "Go and inform the people from the Radiance in St. Louis. Tell them that Alan and I are going back to Chicago. Tell them to make arrangements as soon as possible," Susan lightly instructed. She said she was giving instructions, but her tone did not have any overbearing attitude. "Yes, ma'am." The female bodyguard nodded and immediately began clearing plates and cups from the table in front of them. "We can take care of those. I'll go and tell Richard our plans. It's not like we want him to think that we have just left without knowing why," Alan said as he stood up and walked out of the courtyard with a smile on his face. At the same time, in the villa on the outskirts of Chicago, Brett Stewart had just finished reading the information that his people had gathered. It showed that the Alliance was gathering in all directions, and they had adopted a method of splitting up into smaller groups. "Is there any movement from the Alliance around Chicago?" Brett asked in a flat tone. Roger Knott replied, "Someone secretly went to the Williams family last night and talked to Thomas Williams for more than 2 hours. All of the members of the Alliance in Detroit have disappeared, and even the address of the branch has been destroyed. However, the people we planted are still in contact with each other. None of the members of the Chicago branch have made any moves, and for some reason they're all still working for Adriana Wright." Roger's face revealed a somewhat awkward expression, and it looked as though he wanted to say something but stopped himself. He didn't know if he should say it or not. Brett Stewart looked at him and smiled. He took a sip of tea and said softly, "Roger, just say what you want to say. There's no reason to hide anything between the two of us." Roger heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. "Sir, you might not know this.
Xavier Marshall of the Alliance visited the Archer family compound not too long ago. It seems that he is working for Kevin."
"Oh, is that so?"
Brett Stewart raised his eyebrows in surprise. Although the expression on his face did not change much, his eyes quickly flashed a subtle trace of viciousness. The relationship between the Alliance and the Myriads had become more and more complicated recently. Regardless of what was seen in the light of day, they had never stopped fighting in the shadows. Especially after Brett Stewart had ascended to the throne, the Myriads firmly opposed the Pinnacle's arrival, and the relationship between the two organizations had almost completely fallen apart.
"Kevin becomes even more and more mysterious recently. The people of the Alliance actually want to work for him,"
Brett said while gently rotating the delicate porcelain teacup in his hand.
"Sir, there is something that I wanted to tell you a long time ago."
Roger hesitated for a moment before he mustered up the courage in his heart and said,
"Kevin's background is more than just mysterious. Many people are already dissatisfied with him. They don't know if he can be trusted, and now he has an unclear relationship with the Alliance. I am really beginning to get worried that he—"
"Enough. Don't say any more."
Brett Stewart suddenly became furious as he interrupted Roger in the middle of a sentence. He smashed the teacup in his hand on the ground and stood up from his chair quickly. "Do you know what kind of relationship I have with Kevin? I guarantee you that even if everyone else betrayed me, Kevin would never do anything that would be seen as a betrayal of me." Brett's breathing became very heavy and fast, his kept chest moving up and down as he glared at Roger. "Roger, don't forget that if it wasn't for Kevin, I never would have become Supreme Commander in the first place. If it wasn't for him, I would have died a long time ago," he added. Roger hurriedly dropped to one knee and lowered his head.
I'm sorry, sir. I didn't intend to be disrespectful in any way. I was only trying to look out for you, Supreme Commander,"
Roger said apologetically. Brett Stewart was right. After Travis Adams died, Kevin was the one who supported him in becoming the Supreme Commander. If Kevin was really so ambitious that he was only looking out for himself, even if he did not take the position himself, he still could have helped secure it for Dalton Steele instead. In Brett's mind, the fact that he hadn't pursued that route proved that he would always remain loyal to Brett.
"You don't have to worry about Kevin. If he does decide to rebel in the future, I would never even blame him. I am sure that he would have good reasons for doing so,"
Brett said righteously.
"Yes, sir. You're right, sir,"
Roger said as he nodded several times. Cold sweat kept dripping down his forehead. Ever since Brett Stewart became the Supreme Commander, his power base had been rising dramatically without him even realizing it. Although it was possible that he simply hadn't noticed it himself, the people around him were constantly under pressure.
"Okay then, send some smart people to keep an eye on the people of the Alliance. As long as they are close to Chicago, send them to me."
Brett gave the order decisively. He then added,
"Anyway, there's nothing much to talk about with them. The Pinnacle hasn't arrived yet, and the Alliance won't be a factor."
"Yes, sir,"
Roger replied, nodding again. Hundreds of miles away from Chicago, surrounded by mountains, was the Alliance's headquarters. The Alliance leader and his wife were strolling through a garden surrounded by flowers in full bloom.
"The Alliance has been so busy with things recently, I feel like I've been neglecting you. Please don't take offense,"
the Alliance leader said gently and casually plucked a flower and inserted it into her hair. "You have a lot on your plate every day. I understand that you need to prioritize the Alliance's affairs. I can assure you that I don't take it personally," Selena Salem replied faintly. The Alliance leader turned to her and suddenly asked,
"By the way, have you heard any news about our messenger recently?"
I wonder why he would ask me this question now, Selena thought to herself as her heart could not help but beat faster when she heard him mention Kevin's name. Selena had been thinking about Kevin a lot in the time since they had last seen each other. She suddenly had the urge to abandon everything in the Alliance and go find him. The Alliance leader added,
"I think that he is a young man who can be molded. Now that the Pinnacle is about to descend and the outside world is in chaos, it's time for him to prove himself. He is young and promising, so I should really take him under my wing. I can also say a few words of praise for him in front of the pinnacle."
Selena did not speak and only nodded her head a few times.
"If you hear any news about him, please do tell me. I think I'm going to let him deal with the people of the Myriads,"
the Alliance leader said. Selena couldn't help but widen her eyes when she heard this. The Alliance leader was actually looking to take this opportunity to destroy all of the 10 schools, and then use the pinnacle to destroy the Myriads. But aren't we on the same side as the Myriads? What do you want to do with them? Selena asked curiously.